are live.
Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Terry Glavin. I'm legal counsel for the City of Chicago Department of Procurement Services. As we begin this afternoon's workshop, I want to say thank you for taking time out of your schedules to be here today to learn about doing business with the City of Chicago. And I want to specifically thank you on behalf of Mayor Rahm Emanuel for being here, and also specifically our Commissioner, Jamie Rhee. I want to thank you on her behalf as well. We all appreciate you wanting to learn about our process, and in the meantime, I know you're juggling your office work, you're juggling your marketing, and in the meantime learning about government contracting, so you have a lot going on. We appreciate you juggling all that and making time for us. I'm going to do my best to make this session valuable to you, and what I'll do is I'll go through the material, and then at the end of the session, if you have any questions that you've gathered through the next hour or so, if you'll save them till the end, then what I'll do is I'll answer questions at the end. If your question is very general at the end, that you think everyone in the audience would have an interest in an answer to, I can answer the question right at the end of the session in front of everyone. And then what I also do is sometimes there's just very project-specific questions that an individual or a business has, and it's not really relevant or necessarily helpful to everybody, and everyone else has their schedules to keep afterwards. So if you have like a very project-specific question or something very unique to your circumstances, I'll stick around afterward as well to answer questions. Yeah, yes, sir.
Is there a handout for this session?
Great. And what I'm also going to do, though, is I'm not going to just draw the line to the time after the session. If you have questions as you're on your way back to your office this evening or on your way home and you want to ask those questions, or you just down the line need information, I'm going to give you my contact information. You can reach out to me directly at the city, and I'll do my best either to answer your question myself or to find a person or a group that might be a better resource for you if I'm not the best resource. So feel free to reach out to me in the future. The number you can reach me at for my office is 312-744-0851. And my email is my name, so it's terrence.glavin@cityofchicago.org. That's TERRENCE.GLAVIN@cityofchicago.org. Any 312-744-0851. And keep in mind, this is all being streamed. This entire workshop is being streamed online and will be available online going forward. So if there's anything in the presentation where you feel like, hey, I didn't quite get that, if I had one more time to go over it, I would have a deeper understanding. Remember, you can go online, you can watch this entire workshop second, third, fourth, or as many times as you want to get hopefully the best understanding of the materials today. And then the last thing I want to mention before I begin, last but not least, keep in mind there's a workshop schedule available here in the bid and bond room at the city. It's available out on the table outside this bid and bond room. It's also available online. So I encourage everyone, I'm teaching this class or this workshop, feel like maybe I have a good grasp of the material, and I can perhaps give you some maybe perhaps expert guidance in some areas. We have other experts, though, in our department that have an excellent grasp of other areas and other topics. For example, the deputy over our construction unit is probably the best person to talk about construction projects and what's out there and what business opportunities there are. So there's workshops related to construction. There's workshops related to how to get certified if you're eligible as a historically disadvantaged individual or group to get certified for business opportunities. We have a workshop with experts on certification. We have experts on compliance. So there are a number of experts with specific knowledge to certain areas, and they teach separate workshops from this one. And those are a list of those workshops is provided at the locations I mentioned earlier. The purpose of this workshop is really sort of provide a higher level view of doing business with the City of Chicago. And what I hope to do is give you a nice breath of what's going on in city procurement. And then with that, you kind of hopefully get an idea that, hey, now I know where my place is or where it might be in the bigger procurement process or in city business generally. And now that I have maybe a little idea of where my place is or what my opportunities are, I'll start going to these workshops because this is helpful to what I do specifically. But it's hard to know for sure what's going to help you if you don't really understand the scope of public procurement. So I'm going to do my best to give you a high-level view of city procurement. In order to do that, I'm going to cover several topics. So I'm going to talk about the mission of the Department of Procurement Services. That's my department, or the department we work in. The laws that govern procurement process, types of procurement, certification, contract monitoring and compliance, programs and bid incentives, navigating the DPS website, that's the Department of Procurement Services website, and then at the end I'm going to save time for questions and answers. So those are the topics I think that's going to give you a high-level view of procurement at the City of Chicago. The Department of Procurement Services is the contracting authority for the City of Chicago. On the PowerPoint, you'll see our mission statement. What I want to point out to you is we are the contracting authority for the City of Chicago. We are responsible for creating those business relationships between you, the vendors, and all the city departments that perform all the functions citywide. But I want to emphasize, we are the procurement authority for the City of Chicago, because what some folks may not recognize is there are other governmental units out there that are very close to us, both geographically as well as responsibility, but they are separate governmental units with their own procurement authority oftentimes. And the reason I mention that is because I want to encourage you, if you're here looking for business opportunities, don't just feel you're limited to the City of Chicago. You might want to go to the internet and look up Chicago Park District. That's a separate governmental unit. Folks might think all the different parks and recreational areas around the city, well, all the sporting equipment and all the maintenance of pools and swimming pools and whatnot, you might think, oh, that's Department of Procurement Services for the city. No, that's actually something that could be at the Park District under their own rules, under their own procurement authority. You might ride the train. I ride the CTA to work each day. Riding the train, you might think, oh, it's Department of Procurement Services at the City of Chicago that buys the trains, that pays for the maintenance of the rail system. No, that's Chicago Transit Authority. That's a separate governmental unit with its own procurement authority, its own procurement department. So the whole point being is just when you go to the internet, or if you're interested in all the opportunities possible, don't forget about sister agencies, we call them. Those are the other governmental units that have their own procurement authority and their own business opportunities. But today I'm going to focus, because I'm not here to talk to you or tell you how the other governmental units do business. I'm here to talk to you about how the City of Chicago does business and how you can do business with it. So it's important for you, when you're getting your bearings, to understand that the City of Chicago Department of Procurement Services lives within the requirements, both limitations and empowerments, of state and local law. The structure of public procurement for the City of Chicago generally is established by the Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act, which is a state law. It creates sort of a skeleton for all the public procurement process that we're involved in. But then more detail unique to us is established in the Chicago Municipal Code under a section which is 292. That is the section of the Chicago Municipal Code that creates our department. It empowers Jamie Rhee, the commissioner, the chief procurement officer for the City of Chicago. It enables her to create policies, procedures, rules, and regulations for how we operate on a daily basis, and how you, as vendors, are required to compete for contracts within our process. And I say that purposefully when I say compete, because structure of procurement law in the state and at the local level is generally that contracts are awarded primarily by competition. And typically they're awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. That's right in the law, and we have to live by that. Now, there are exceptions and there are interpretations of that law, but that's the general framework and general structure. And the other thing I want to point out is that if there's any federal dollars involved paying for any goods or any services, we oftentimes have to comply with federal law. So a lot of legal framework involved. Now, am I trying to scare you away by telling you there's all these laws, rules, policies, procedures out there, and that you couldn't possibly compete for a contract unless you have your law degree or otherwise? No. It's just me telling you that I think it's a good idea to get familiar with where you would look for the rules that you're going to be competing under, and then once you have a contract, what are the laws that apply to you? And the reason I mention that is because I said contracts are awarded by competition. So what do we know about competition? You do create a certain, at least even playing field, if not competitive advantage for yourself if you know the rules of the competition, right? You're, I think, at the very least, at somewhat of a disadvantage if you enter into any competition and you don't know any of the rules. So I think it would be helpful to you to at least start wandering around the internet, wander around our website, and start getting familiar with the laws, policies, and procedures in public procurement. But what I want you to take away from it at this point, if you're totally new to this, is that contracts are awarded, for the most part, by competition and typically to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. The exceptions include professional service providers are not always to the lowest bidder. And then sometimes there are things like patents and various sole source vendors that there's no competition out there because they are the only ones that can give us something. A patent is a good example. If there's a patent on a product and that's the only vendor that can sell you that product and you need it, that's an example of a sole source. So there are exceptions to the competitive bid requirements. What are the types of procurement? Well, there's small orders, competitive bids, requests for proposals, or RFPs, requests for qualifications, or RFQs, and job order contracts, which we call JOC, and those are just to name a few. But those are the primary categories of procurement. We're going to get in deeper to each one of those, but I'll give you just a quick comment on each. I mentioned almost all contracts are awarded by competitive bid to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. And there are procedures we have to follow to put that opportunity out there for competition. Like we have to advertise them in certain types of newspapers or publications. We have to advertise for a certain amount of days to make sure everybody knows about the opportunity. We have to review bids a certain way. All those requirements are specified for typical or large procurements. But when the total spend on a project is going to be under $100,000, for example, for commodities or work services, we oftentimes call them small orders. And under the law, small orders have a little bit less formal of a process. For example, you can solicit bids by email. They still say fax and even email. So there's a little more flexibility about how you can receive bids when the spend, or how you can solicit bids when the spend's under $100,000. But otherwise, competitive bids are follow a formal process that's structured by law. When we're buying professional services or hiring professional services, those are highly skilled individuals or groups that are providing services. We go through what's called an RFP. I'll describe that a little more detail later. If we're trying to create a pool of vendors, if we know there's going to be an ongoing need for professional services, but the specifics of each project is going to only be known periodically into the future, but we want to make sure we have a pool of vendors in place that are ready to move on those projects, we'll do an RFQ for that pool of vendors. And then lastly, show of hands, anyone here in construction? Okay, we don't have anyone here in construction. I'm not going to get into a great deal about JOC, but job order contracting is a process for awarding typically small to medium-sized construction projects to construction companies by way of competition. But the competition is based on bidding off of price books that establish prices for typical tasks that are involved in a construction project. We have a workshop on JOC. So as your eyes might be glazing over as I'm talking about JOC, as my eyes glazed over the first time I heard about JOC, there's a workshop on it, and that workshop makes it very interesting because we have an expert on it, Byron Whitaker, and he definitely knows the ins and outs of JOC, and actually once you get into the process, it's very interesting, and that workshop would be very informative to you if you are in the construction industry, or if you're even related to the construction industry. For example, if you're in engineering, you might be interested in learning about JOC just for your own information. Now, small orders. Small orders I mentioned are under $100,000 total spent. No formal bid specifications or public advertisement is required. And when we reach out to the public to let everyone know that there's a small order opportunity, we can do so by telephone, fax, written quotation, posted on our website. So there's some flexibility there to get the word out. City of Chicago certified MBE, WBE vendors are solicited first, and MBE, WBE compliance is required for bids over $10,000. Now, what do I mean by MBE and WBE vendors? So MBE stands for Minority Business Enterprise Vendors. WBE stands for Women-Owned Business Enterprise Vendors. And I'll get into a little more detail about that later, but basically those are firms that have to be certified. You're not just eligible, but firms that are actually certified as historically disadvantaged business enterprises, either MBE or WBE. There are other certifications. There's DBE, if you're using federal dollars, that's disadvantaged business enterprise. It's kind of a combination of MBE and WBE on federally funded projects. And there's a number of other certifications I'll get into a little bit later. How about competitive bids when the spend is over $100,000? Well, then it's a little more strict, right? Because we got more dollars out there, there's a little more scrutiny about what we're doing. So we have to advertise right now with the Chicago Sun-Times newspaper, because you're supposed to advertise in a certain paper with a large circulation to make sure the word really does get out there. You can't just advertise in some little local paper that nobody knows about so that only a few people know about the opportunity. That's not fair. So you want to really get the word out with a large newspaper with a large circulation. We also advertise on the cityofchicago.org website /procurement. That's our department's webpage. We have the opportunities available here in the bid and bond room, City Hall room 103. The solicitation period is 10 to 30 calendar days. That gives everyone enough time to know about it, really to let the word hang out there so that in fact is really advertised. And then plan for a bid deposit because it may be required for some bids. And so there is a separate workshop on bonds and bids, but basically if you read the opportunity for a project, it'll specify whether a bid bond is required or a bid deposit. And a bid deposit is almost like a security for the city that you're filing a bid intentionally, that you really want to be committed to the project in case we go through the whole process of evaluating bids. What we don't want to have is someone's just clowning around and start submitting bids randomly. We go through this whole process. We want to award contracts, and then folks say, oh, I was just kidding. I don't want to do that project. Or I submitted that bid, but now there's a better opportunity in Milwaukee, so I'm taking my show on the road there, and I'm not going to perform on your contract at the city. That kind of disruption gives us a lack of continuity in our contract awards. So a bid deposit gives us assurances that everyone wants to be in each competition when they submit a bid, and that we can count on them to follow through when we award a contract. Now, before I get into the slide about pre-bids, let me just give just a little quick process explanation. So we, as a city, determine that we need to buy something, a good or a service. The department that's responsible for that, the mission that's going to be fulfilled by those goods or services, they're the ones that typically decide what it is they need. So police department, they're responsible for policing, crime reduction. In order to do that, they need police cars, right? We at the Department of Procurement Services aren't necessarily the experts in all the requirements of what makes a good police car. The same way we're not experts in what is the best refuse collection truck for streets and sanitation, and how we're not the most knowledgeable about what thickness of water pipes are needed for the Department of Water Management, right? So you get the idea. We're not the experts in everything we buy. We're the experts in the development and award of contracts and compliance with contract law. Departments develop the specifications of what it is they want to buy. They forward it to us. We advertise it through one of the methods I described earlier in the paper or on the city's website. You, the vendor in the community, are constantly monitoring the newspapers, the websites, looking for government procurement opportunities, and you identify one of our advertisements. When you do, you either request electronically or come down here to the bid and bond room, what's called a bid package. And when you receive that bid package, you're going to open it up, and it's going to contain what we call specifications. There's general specifications and detailed specifications. But basically, specifications do this. They tell you what we want to buy exactly, what are the characteristics of what we want to buy, or what services we want delivered, and how we want them delivered. You read through those items, those specifications, and you're going to decide, hey, do I sell this or not? And then you'll make a decision, do I want to respond? But sometimes you read those specs, and there could be questions you have, like, I don't get it. There's something about the specification I don't get. Well, we do pre-bid conferences. They can be optional. Sometimes they're mandatory. Sometimes they're at a site because we want to give vendors the opportunity to do a site inspection of an area if, for example, construction's needed or repairs. But a pre-bid conference gives you an opportunity to review specifications, get your questions addressed, and we encourage your attendance if it's not mandatory. If it is mandatory, you have to attend conferences that are mandatory. It can be a basis for rejecting your bid if you don't attend a mandatory conference. And then the result, the pre-bid conference or site inspection may result in an addendum, addenda, or clarifications being issued by our department. What's the difference? Well, let's say you ask a question and we think, oh, our specifications are fine. We just need to give a little information to help the vendor understand. We'll issue written answers to your question, and we'll send them to all the vendors, not just the one asking the question. But what happens sometimes is a vendor will ask such a good question that it makes us realize, hey, our specifications are flawed. Like they just pointed something out that we didn't either know, didn't understand, or we just made a mistake. And this is not a good competition because our specifications are flawed. Then we might issue an addendum, one change in writing, or addenda, several changes. And then we send out those notices to all the vendors, and you realize, hey, the requirements of this project are maybe different now. I got to know about that. Am I still okay with bidding on this project as changed? If an addenda goes out, you have to acknowledge it. Otherwise, we can reject your bid. You typically initial the addenda when you submit your bid as one total package. Okay, so again, vendors interested in a project are encouraged to review specifications, contract documents during the solicitation period, and contact the Department of Procurement Services if you have any questions. If there's no pre-bid conference offered, you can contact the person who's identified on the project documents and ask your questions directly to the person if a pre-bid conference is not being offered. When you complete the bid documents, you want to make sure you fill in all the required information. You got to note that there are certain documents must be submitted and executed with the bid, and if not, the bid will be rejected, as I mentioned earlier. And anywhere it says you have to sign, make sure you sign. Anywhere you have to initial, make sure you initial. If it says the president of the company has to sign somewhere, make sure it's the president. If the signatures have to be notarized, make sure the signatures are notarized. Because the law, as I mentioned, requires that vendors be responsive and responsible. What does that mean? Well, responsible means that the vendor is presently capable of delivering what we want the way we want it. It means you have the financial capacity to complete the work. You have the equipment to complete the project. or you have a warehouse with enough inventory, or at least sources that can get you the inventory to sell what we need. That's being responsible, presently capable. The other legal requirement is that you're responsive, and that includes not just during contract performance, but at the time of bid, that you're not taking exceptions to anything we're asking competing vendors to do. So if we say in our specifications, we want to buy police cars, and those police cars have to be red, white, and blue in color to match the City of Chicago colors, you might have a whole warehouse full of green police cars that you can give us at the best price. But if you offer those instead of the colors we need at the city, you are being non-responsive. Or if we put out our specifications, and after you've picked up this bid package from the city, and you read the first time through that we want red, white, and blue police cars, but all of a sudden, the city decided at some point, hey, it'd be more festive around Christmas if we had green, red, and white police cars. So we put out an addenda saying we're changing the police car colors. You read that addenda, and you say, I can provide red, green, and white police cars too, so I'm still going to bid. And it says in the corner of that addendum, you must initial and submit this addenda with your package so we know you read it and we know you're committed to the new color police cars. You fail to initial where it says to initial, that little failure to initial that document can be a basis for your entire bid being rejected and you losing the business opportunity. Now, why is that terrible for everyone? Because you took all that time to prepare your bid. You looked for sources for police cars or for materials, whatever it is you're going to sell to us. You came down here, you submitted your bid, you were all excited, you took time away from your other business opportunities to do all this, and what happened? You didn't get the business opportunity because of one clerical error, which is a shame. But it's not just a shame for you, it's a shame for the city because we have to reject your bid and you're the lowest price bidder, let's say. By law, we go to the next lowest bidder, so we spend more money unnecessarily. But if we don't follow the law, right, it starts becoming an arbitrary process. So sometimes we have to be sticklers about process because sometimes the integrity of the system in the long run is protected by being strict about compliance. So what I'm getting at is cross your T's, dot your I's, read every page of specifications, and you'll be more successful in the bidding process. Or at the very least, you won't inadvertently lose an opportunity that you should have won. So with your bid submittal, you're going to include any bid deposit in the proper form. Cash is not accepted. Bid deposits, usually 5% of the bid and normally refundable, may be required for some bids. Bid fees are non-refundable, may be required for some bid submittals if the project's over $100,000. And timeliness. When bids are due, they are due. If it says 11 a.m. that bids are due, 11:02 does not meet the requirement. It's just like crossing your T's and dotting your I's on the documents. If you're a minute late, you may have missed the boat. And even if you're the lowest bidder, your bid may not be the winner. It may in fact be rejected or not accepted. Bid openings are Monday through Friday, except major holidays. 11 a.m., City Hall, this room, bid and bond room, 103. Bids are opened and read aloud. We literally receive the bids, and literally the bids are opened up. The numbers from each vendor are read aloud, and then they are tabulated and subsequently posted so everyone can see what their competition bid. Now, their bids will be reviewed for accuracy and completeness, for responsiveness, and a review will be conducted of vendor responsibility. And then you can see the tabulation on the DPS website 24 hours after the bid opening. Now, you don't start work that day that there's a bid opening and you find out you've won the competition. We have to review all the vendors, make sure they're responsible, make sure the pricing makes sense, that there's no mistake, clerical error that results in the ultimate bid price being unreliable, make sure it is reliable. And then also, there's by law signatures. It has to be, the contract has to be reviewed by the city's law department. It has to be executed by the mayor, the comptroller, my boss, the city's chief procurement officer. And so anticipate a little bit of time is going to pass between the time you raise your hand with enthusiasm that you won a contract and the time you actually begin work. But it's not that long of a time, but just be prepared for that. There is a little gap between bid and ultimately contract performance. Ultimately, there's a recommendation of award. Once we've accepted bid packages and reviewed them, we go through the signature cycle, as I mentioned. We review any bonds, insurance that's submitted that protect the city, make sure that we have adequate protection, and ultimately the contract's awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder for competitively bid contracts. Now, what if we're not buying commodities or goods? What if we're buying services? Well, if the services are not considered professional services or highly skilled, then we actually follow the same competitive bid process, awarding to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. We call those work services if they're not professional in nature. What are examples? Let's say examples are landscaping, some security guard services. Now, what I want to emphasize is these are not in any way underappreciated services. I mean, security guard services are extremely important to the city. City beautification, obviously, is very important to the city. So landscaping services are extremely important. But by law, they're considered types of services that are more common in nature. And as long as you have basic licenses that you need, basic permits, and perhaps some experience and some basic training, there's more than a few vendors that can provide those types of services. And at a certain point, the level of skill doesn't make as much of a difference to the city as being able to get the best price. So the law has us award those type of contracts by competition, just like commodities. If the service arises to the level of being a professional service, highly skilled, we don't necessarily want to just go to the lowest bidder. We want to balance quality with price, right? For example, whether it's a physician or any other type of healthcare or accounting, for example, you don't necessarily want to just look for the lowest price service provider, right? When you go look for your doctor, I don't think anyone just says, I'm going to pay the least I possibly can. They want to get, everyone's got a budget. At a certain point, you want to spend, within your limits, but you also want to get good value. That's what RFPs are for. You're balancing value, or you're balancing price with skill, and in the end, trying to get the best value. So RFPs are the methods that we request proposals. Proposals, instead of bids, are submitted by vendors, where vendors propose why they're the best value. When the city doesn't have in-house technical experts, they often rely on RFPs. RFPs define the project objectives, scope of services, but we don't detail every aspect of the project. There's some flexibility for the vendors to propose how they can perform the project the best, and perhaps come up with solutions we didn't even think of for the opportunity. And we evaluate the proposals that are submitted. We form evaluation committees made up of members of city departments and staff, folks that can evaluate proposals. We also bring vendors in. There can be in-person question and answer sessions. And ultimately, the evaluation committees score the vendors, score their proposals, and based on scores, evaluations, and recommendations from the department that's ultimately going to be using the service provider, a choice is made, and award is to the highest rated and ranked respondent or respondents. Now, what about requests for qualifications? Well, let's say we don't know exactly right down to the detail, or at least good enough detail, what work's going to be needed. The example I always use is, let's say, engineering services related to road construction is a good example. What do we know about road construction? We're always going to need it in Chicago, right? There's endless miles of roads, and with our weather, it's constantly needing rehabilitation, if not rebuilding. What do we also know about road construction? It's not always funded by just the city. There can be other governmental units funding our projects, including federal funds. And then what do we finally know? We don't always know when money is going to be coming in, right? There's budget approvals, there's grant approvals, and they come in not always on a definite schedule. There's also unexpected circumstances on roads from weather and other unforeseen circumstances. So we don't always know the details of the project. So what we do is, knowing we're going to always have road work, but not knowing the details every time right away and not always knowing when it's going to be required, we create pools of professional service providers like engineers. And we advertise the same way, but instead of requesting bids or instead of requesting proposals, we request vendors to submit qualifications. And when they submit qualifications, it's like your corporate resume. And you're not going to tell us when you reply to an RFQ, you're not going to tell us how you're going to perform a specific project, because we don't tell you what the specific project is going to be. We tell you generally what the scope of work is going to be. For example, in an RFQ for engineering services, we need civil engineers that provide, have this type of education and training and experience in road construction. So at least the vendors know they're competing for road construction. And we know that it's going to be maybe on a certain area of Chicago, so the vendors at least know what distance from their corporate headquarters their equipment is going to have to go. So we get as detailed as we can, not knowing all the details. Vendors submit their qualifications, their corporate resumes, if you will. We form the evaluation committees, we make sure people are qualified, and then if they're qualified, they get into a pool. What happens in the pool? Nothing at first. You sit there, you don't do any work, you don't make any money. But why you're in the reason you're in the pool is because then when opportunities do come up for specific work, we only advertise to the pool. And the pools last for several years. They get reopened later, after several years, and more vendors can compete again to get in. But it's this exclusive party that is created for a certain number of years, living under what we call a master consulting agreement. And then when we know specific projects come up, we go to that pool of vendors that have master consulting agreements and we say, okay, you're in the pool, you're all qualified, we've got the specific work, let's talk about getting this work done. And through competition, that specific work will be awarded to one or several of the vendors in the pool through what's called a task order. And a task order is basically a project-specific mini contract within the scope of that original master consulting agreement. So that's basically how an RFQ works at a very high level. The main takeaway is this. When you're looking in the paper or online, and I just want you to be able to look at an opportunity, and if it says RFP, or if the next advertisement says an opportunity is an RFQ, or another one says it's a bid, I want you to at least know by looking at it what you're getting yourself into, or what the opportunity is that's being created. Because, for example, you might say to yourself, I'm really busy right now. An RFQ is perfect, because I'll get into a pool, and I'll be in the pool for upcoming opportunities, but I'm not necessarily going to get something right now while I've got my resources tied up on other work, so RFQ is great. Another vendor might say, I don't have time to even prepare my qualifications, and an RFQ doesn't even guarantee me any work ever, if not at least for, in the upcoming year. It's not worth my time. I wouldn't do it unless it's an RFP where I'm probably going to get work now. So it's good to know what the different mechanisms are so you can strategically choose which opportunities you're going to take advantage of. Job order contracts. Again, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about job order contracts because none of you are in construction. And oh, I'm sorry. Are you in construction?
Well, actually, you did point out that if you were in engineering or architecture, it might be of interest. So yes.
Okay. So I'll go through the slides a little bit. I do encourage you, though, to go to the workshop specific to JOC because it's very helpful. But basically, JOC, it's firm, fixed price, competitively bid, indefinite quantity contract, and it's specifically designed for department's construction program, and typically small to medium-sized projects. So how JOC came about, and I don't want to turn this into a full-on history class, but it gives you just a little bit of context. A group came together, actually an individual, but ultimately formed a group, and what they decided is they decided typical construction projects have common tasks. If you're building out a house, there's probably going to be window installation, there's probably going to be plumbing, and there's probably roof perhaps shingling, but there's common projects. And that what they could do is they could break down these common projects and figure out by marketplaces around the country what's the typical rate that these different tasks are going at in different marketplaces. And then what they do is they created this price book, and it literally, I mean, endless tasks with associated prices. And that what vendors can do is they could compete, but they could compete by offering prices that are based off of that price book. And basically, whether it's a discount, markup, basically you're competing using that price list to offset or to show you how you differentiate yourself from other vendors. And I think what I want to point out to you, though, is that it's still competitive. Okay, the whole point of it is that it is still competitive, but in theory, it's supposed to move a little bit faster. And it's meant to solicit qualifications from companies who possess a high degree of technical expertise and knowledge in specific disciplines. Again, as I mentioned, small and medium-sized projects typically. And instead of bidding every small or medium construction job and developing plans and technical specifications for every single project out there, you can use that pricing book I talked about and quickly build a specification for a project. So the real upside is on, quite frankly, on the city side. You can put together a project, in theory, a lot quicker because you've got this price book and you basically use those components and you build specifications using the components from the price book. For general contractors, they're solicited to respond to an advertised job specification, which contains a unit price book, basically various construction tasks with descriptions, unit of measures, and unit prices for each task, and you compete by bidding off of that price, the tasks from that price book. Again, if you're not in construction, everyone's still awake, so I'm thrilled. I must have put a lot of animation in my voice and made it sound interesting, hopefully, to most. But if you're in construction, it's probably very interesting to you once you get into it, and Deputy Whitaker does a great job of presenting. So you may be encouraged, I hope, to go to that workshop. It's in the workshop schedule. I'm afraid I don't know the date off the top of my head, but we'll stick around and we'll get you information. Okay? And then ultimately, jobs are awarded to general contractors offering the most favorable adjustment factors against the price book. Work performed during normal working hours and work performed other than normal working hours. So it's a very inclusive type mechanism. And then the value of the job contract depends upon departmental needs and budget. Now we're going to switch gears. I'm talking about process, but now I want to talk a little bit about opportunity and how the city has even the playing field for vendors and company owners that have been historically disadvantaged in government business. So we have certifications. We have MBE, WBE. I just defined and described those earlier. We have BEPD, that's business enterprises owned by people with disabilities. We have DBE, I defined that earlier. That's basically like the federal designation for MBEs and WBEs together when we have federally funded projects. And then we have ACDBE, which is Airport Concession Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. So it's basically like DBEs that are working on concessions, doing work out at the airports. And that's one of the reasons why we do ACDBE, because typically there's, it involves international national requirements, federal laws, and so we got ACDBE. What are the basic eligibility requirements? Well, typically businesses must be at least 51% owned and controlled by a minority, women, or other disadvantaged individual. And under the BEPD program, businesses must be at least 51% owned and controlled by an individual with a disability. If this is of interest to you, there are workshops specific to certification, how to get certified, who's eligible, once you're certified, what are the benefits, what are you going to do with that certification? And then ultimately, if you're a prime contractor using certified firms, what are the compliance requirements, what are the benefits, what are the pitfalls if you're out of compliance. So So there's a number of workshops specific to certification issues. I encourage you to attend those. What I want to drive home today is this. You're here to do business with the City of Chicago. You may or may not be eligible for one of these certifications. You do not need to be certified to do business with the City of Chicago. But to get the benefits of the certifications, you have to be certified. Now, do you have to have a contract in mind or be prepared to bid on a specific project to start the certification process? No. You don't have to even know about an opportunity that's out there for you yet. But it takes time because we have to review your application. We have to make sure that the person or people behind the company are actually eligible people, that it's not some type of front or scam company. We have to make sure you're in the area of business that you claim you are, the specialty area that you claim you want to be in for credit. So there's a bunch of things the city has to do to make sure the program has integrity. That takes time. But you might see an opportunity that comes up tomorrow. You don't have to be certified to bid on current opportunities, but you do have to be certified to get the benefits of these programs. We, as a department, get involved in contract monitoring. We make sure that MBEs, WBE, and DBE commitments are being met. When vendors say they're going to use these certified firms as subcontractors on projects, or if a prime vendor bids and says they're a certified firm, we make sure that all of that is true. We ensure compliance with Chicago residency ordinance requirements and equal employment opportunity commitments. For Chicago residency ordinance, the contract must be estimated at $100,000 or more and funded by the City of Chicago. 50% of the total work hours must be performed by actual residents of the City of Chicago. For equal employment opportunity, in order to promote equality of opportunity for minority and female personnel on city-funded construction projects, an award criteria determination, or canvassing formula, as we call it, must be inserted into each contract specification that is estimated over $100,000. So we actually incorporate legal requirements for equal opportunity into our contract documents. So they are something that is binding upon vendors. So it's not just opportunity in theory, it's opportunity in practice. And bidders are invited to propose minority and female employee utilization goals. Now, contract monitoring compliance. How do you achieve compliance? A prime contractor, the main contractor bidding on a project, can be an MBE, WBE, or DBE. Certified firms can joint venture and compete on contracts where there are participation requirements. You can utilize certified firms as subcontractors for a portion of work. And you can also purchase materials for a contract from suppliers. Now, what do I mean by all this participation and utilization? So the program for historically disadvantaged firms, whether it's MBE, WBE, or DBE, or otherwise, the whole point of the program is to even the playing field for prime contractors, but also to bring subcontractors on board that have been historically disadvantaged. And some of the goals, there are more, but I'd say the primary goals of the programs include not only making sure that historically disadvantaged individuals and groups get a portion of the dollars that flow out for city work and for purchased goods, but it's not just about spreading the money around. It's about building capacity. And so it's not enough just saying, oh, we'll give a portion of the revenue we make to historically disadvantaged firms. We actually want firms to participate on the work so that they gain experience, gain capacity, and ultimately can grow, hire other folks, perhaps bid as primes eventually on projects. And so what we have in our municipal code are participation goals that are built into our contracts where a certain percentage of the work is to be performed by subcontractors from historically disadvantaged groups. And when bidders bid, they commit to hiring and actually using and actually paying historically disadvantaged firms as they perform the entirety of projects, and then a portion, there's a commitment that be performed by historically disadvantaged groups. So that's kind of what, when I say utilization and participation, it's basically making sure historically disadvantaged individuals and groups and their companies are part of projects in a meaningful way, not just on paper or in theory or just in a sharing of the profits. We actually make sure that when a vendor commits to utilizing MBE, WBE, and DBE firms and when BEPD firms are participating, we actually monitor payments that are made to the subs. We receive reports and we look at those reports and we want to know, are the subs actually getting paid for their work? And if they're not, do we need to take action as a department, or is there a justification for the lack of payment? But we monitor, we make sure there's compliance. There's also a number of programs and incentives to encourage a level playing field and equal participation. And I actually teach, I and others at our department teach a workshop specific to this topic, or these topics. So I'm not going to get into great detail, but if you think any of these sound interesting to you, I would encourage you to go to the Programs and Bid Incentives workshop, where we talk about Small Business Initiative Program for Construction, Diversity Credit Program. That's another way of promoting diversity in the vendor community. And then we also talk about mentor-protege program requirements and opportunities. And then we talk about bid incentives for small businesses, enterprises, veteran-owned business enterprises owned by people with disabilities, city-based manufacturers, city-based businesses, how you can get bid incentives for apprentice utilization, and finally, if you're using alternatively powered vehicles in your fleet, how you can get a bid incentive. And when I say bid incentive, what do I mean by that? Well, depending on whether you meet the requirements of these programs under bid incentives, and then sometimes it's tiered depending on the level of your participation in one of these bid incentives. You can get, for valuation purposes, a discount off your bid price for competitive evaluation. The best way to describe it is, let's say you, for example, are a vendor, you sell something the city wants to buy, and let's say you fall into a category that allows for a bid incentive. And let's say that you fall into a category that allows for a, let's say, 5% bid incentive. And say there's only one other vendor in the community that's competing against you for a contract, you both bid. The other vendor does not qualify for any bid incentives. You qualify for the 5% bid incentive under one of the programs. You both bid $100,000 for the project. What happens? When we evaluate the bids, you have a 5% incentive that you qualify for. Your bid in our eyes looks like $95,000. The other bidder who did not qualify for any incentives, their bid still looks like $100,000 to us. You win the competition because you are the lowest and hopefully responsive and responsible bidder. When you do the work and you perform the services or deliver the goods, you get paid at $100,000, so you don't lose any money by taking advantage of the incentive. And that's how, really a simplified way of looking at how incentives work, but that might get you warmed up to the idea of coming to the other workshop. Now, a few topics that just I want to throw out at you because again, to be a competitor, and the process of contract award, as I mentioned at the beginning, is competitive. You want to know the rules to the best of your ability. You want to know the lay of the land. And a good way to get started doing that is go to the Department of Procurement Services website, cityofchicago.org/procurement. Start looking at contracts that have been awarded to other vendors. What did they bid? How did they bid? You'll perhaps learn how to bid. You also just may learn about what other vendors you might want to partner with in the future, maybe as a subcontractor, maybe as a prime in a joint venture. But it's both informative and it also could be good for your networking capabilities. You might want to look and see what payments out there, how vendors are being paid, what they're being paid. It might help you with some business intelligence about how to what bid price to put together. There's bid tabulations you can look at, again, for networking or just to see who else is out there, who might be competing for the next contract when it comes back out. Because remember, the city oftentimes buys the same thing over and over, year after year, decade after decade. And so sometimes you can look at the old contract and it's going to look just like the new contract that's coming up, right? And then you can look at the bid prices and, keeping in mind inflation and other factors, you kind of get an idea that the vendors that bid before are likely to bid again if they're still in business. And you kind of know, subject to inflation, what they're probably willing to do the work at, and it'll give you an idea of how to calculate your bid if you want to be competitive and try and come in under their pricing. You can look at weekly bid opportunities on our website. You can search MBEWBE firm directory for networking or just to meet compliance if you're going to bid on a project and you need participants. You can see what bid incentives are out there, our policies, rules, and regulations. So it's a great website with a lot of information. You can go to a database on our department's webpage. There's an icon in the middle. Contract Awards is the title of the icon. You can click on that, and it'll take you to a search engine. You can search old contracts, bid tabulations, disclosures that have been made by companies, payments that have been made to vendors. I don't know if I'm missing anything, but basically there's a whole lot of information on that search engine, and it's a great source of, again, business intelligence that might make you a more competitive vendor, if not a good networker in the vendor community. And these are just some screenshots of what you'll see when you go to that search engine. But it gives you a variety of ways at getting at the information. Because you, for example, you might know the PO number of a contract, but not the spec number. Or you might know the spec number and not the PO number. By the way, for those who don't know, contracts, we typically have identifying numbers so we can keep track and we can all talk about the same contracts. And those identifiers flow with the contract through the life cycle, from contract formation to closeout. And the most common numbers you're going to be able to use to get the conversation on the same page is either a purchase order number or a spec number and a project description. So those are some things, like when you call our department and you got a question about a specific project, it's very helpful for you to know the purchase order number, which is usually an identifier on a project document, specification number, which is unique to a project's documents, and then a project description, usually tells you what generally we're buying. So those are the screenshots for our search engine. Great source of information. Last thing I want to mention is we're very active on social media, Facebook, Twitter. Follow us, sign up, stay connected, be notified electronically of what's the latest and greatest that we're doing. And we encourage you to connect with the department on the internet through social media. Thank you for taking time to be here and sitting through the presentation, both the really exciting stuff I threw out at you and maybe the not so exciting stuff. I encourage you to go to more workshops, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the future. If you have any questions, I'll stick around. Please feel free to ask any questions.